Hello and welcome to From Our Perspective to Therapist Moms and a Mic. I'm Claudia Glassman.
And I'm Katie Truax.
Hi, Katie.
Hi, Claude. Today
What are we doing today?
Drum roll.
Narcissists. I can't drum roll if that's what you're waiting for.
That was the drum. Narcissism. Yes, this is such a hot topic right now, and has been probably for what, like a couple of years, I would say at least.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a trend. It's everywhere. It's on vlogs, it's on blogs, it's on TikTok, it's on Instagram, it's on Pinterest. Man, like narcissism is everywhere. I'm sure there's books coming out. It's on like TV. People are appearing on talk shows and so forth, like the Today Show, to talk about these kinds of things. There's people who are kind of popping out as like experts through social media that are really getting recognized, who are launching books and talks and workshops and traveling to speak about all this. And it's a bittersweet thing. I think that we mentioned this when we talked about anxiety some time ago, because anxiety is similar in the fact that it's a popular topic right now, right? And so it's kind of like a double-edged sword, right? On one hand, it's good that we're increasing awareness of things, we're normalizing things, we're validating people's experiences, like this phenomenon, right, that we have because of the World Wide Web, that you're not alone in this anymore. But at the same time, there's a lot of information out there right now that is given by people who are not necessarily credentialed to be giving this information. And it can be opinion that is presented as fact, and sometimes it's maybe either misleading or damaging or harmful or just untrue. And there's so many layers we could pull back to discuss that, but it's really an interesting topic. So I'm glad you brought this up today, because this was your idea.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, because I hear it a lot, right? Whether it's like, in a session, I'm dating someone, my friend's dating someone who's a narcissist, and this person's a narcissist, and my mom's a narcissist, my dad's a narcissist. Now they exist, obviously. But I don't know if the prevalence is as high as it sounds in today's. Now, I'm not dismissing that people can have tendencies that feel like narcissism, right? Or behaviors that are narcissistic in nature. But that doesn't necessarily turn someone, or does not mean that someone is a full-blown narcissist. Because I think, statistically speaking, it is not as prevalent of a disorder as we think.
I actually have, Claudia, the DSM here, which we are being videoed now. So this is what the
this is what that therapist again. Here we go.
So for those of you who are not familiar with the DSM, the DSM stands for Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. We are currently on our 5th edition. And so what that means is that this is like the Bible of diagnoses, right? So for medical doctors, we have the ICD. For mental health professionals, we have the DSM. So if it's not in here, it's not actually a diagnosis. And that this is how one, kind of teases out what diagnosis a client or patient might get in the mental health field. And so the way our diagnostic system works is there are criteria that must be met in order to receive a diagnosis, and there's rule out. So things that, like, okay, well, if you have this, it can't be, the other thing. So the system actually, it defines things pretty clearly. It's pretty cut and dry. It's pretty black and white. This is made by a bunch of professionals who are very established and well reputed in the field, who sit around boardroom table for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hash all this out. And that's why this is the 5th revision. I think we've had some other kind of minor revisions in there too. Like 4, we had DSM-4, and then we had DSM-4 TR.
So I don't know if anyone cares.
Okay, so
they're like, how many revisions? This is where we nerd out, but other people may be like, yeah, get
whatever.
Get to the
That's how we get there, though. But so this is so what we're gonna tell you. So what they say, the prevalence is from 0 to 6.2%.
So not the 80% I'm hearing about. Yeah. So think about that.
Mhm.
That's percentage of the population that would actually meet criteria for this.
Mhm.
Yeah. I'm
All right,
definitely
so
hearing about it more.
me too. Me too.
Yeah.
So, and which is really interesting. So, should we start with the diagnostic criteria?
Yeah. Let's go into what does it actually mean from, a medical perspective.
Yeah. All right, I'll geek out again. Here we go. Ready for this?
Yes, let's geek out. We're going to do it. But I think
All
you
right.
have to understand it, right? To be able to assess it in your family and friends. Just kidding.
That's right. And then so we're going to share with you guys like not only what it is, but what it's not as well, because there are times when we hear this phrase tossed around, and it's okay to use a phrase as long as you're not too serious. It's not causing anybody harm. Like, you might wake up one day and say, God, I'm so depressed about this weather. Well, I'm not actually meeting criteria for major depressive disorder. It's just a state of phrase, right?
Yes.
So, okay, as long as we're aware. All right, so for all your narcissism is actually called narcissistic personality disorder. The personality disorders are a very specific class of mental health diagnoses that are unique in that they're defined first and foremost by this part's really important, a pervasive pattern, okay? Pervasive among most or all circumstances, right? Pattern. This recurs over time. Okay. And then with narcissistic personality disorder, it continues a pervasive pattern of grandiosity in fantasy or behavior, need for admiration, and lack of empathy. All three of those. That begins early in adulthood and present in a variety of contexts. Okay, as indicated by 5 or more of the following. All right, so this is one of the things I love about the way DSM diagnoses are given is there's 9 possibilities. Okay, there's 9 criteria. In order to receive the diagnosis, you have to meet 5 of those 9. And if not, then you can say, like what Claudia said, like this person might have narcissistic traits or narcissistic tendencies, but they don't meet criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. All right, number 1, has a grandiose sense of self importance. For example, exaggerates achievements and talents, expects to be recognized as superior without commensurate achievements. Okay, you want to say anything about that, Claudia?
Don't we all? No, just kidding. I did nothing, but you will recognize how awesome I am.
Yeah, which I think is really important, right? Because without commensurate achievements, if somebody is crushing it and they know they're crushing it, that doesn't make a narcissist, right?
Right. Just like arrogance does not make a narcissist, although it is one of the characteristics of narcissism, right? Yes. Yes. What's next, Katie?
That's next. Is preoccupied with fantasies of unlimited success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love. Success, power, brilliance, beauty, or ideal love.
Yeah.
Preoccupied with fantasies. Number 3, believes that he or she is, quote, special.
Opinion.
My daughter wanted to know if she can rent a Barbie movie. Let me try again. Do not disturb. I did
And this is
click
the
it.
parenting part from our perspective as
Our
kids are
parent.
trying to rent.
It says my focus is on till 422, so I don't know what the heck is happening. Believes he or she is special and unique and can only be understood by or should associate with the other special or high status people or institutions.
Mm-hmm.
Number 4, requires excessive admiration. Number 5, has a sense of entitlement. For example, unreasonable expectations of especially favorable treatment or automatic compliance with his or her expectations. That they somehow are going to get special treatment in many circumstances or contexts, and why not? Why would you not cater to me? Okay. Number 6 is interpersonally exploitative. For example, takes advantage of others to achieve his or her own ends.
Mhm.
Number 7 lacks empathy, is unwilling to recognize or identify with the feelings and needs of others. Number 8 is often envious of others or believes that others are envious of him or her. And number 9 shows arrogant, haughty behaviors or attitudes. Okay, so if one says yes, if we get green lights to 5 or more of those 9 criteria, a mental health professional may assign a diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder.
Yes. But you can see with that like description, right? Because I mean, as you're reading the descriptors, those are potentially easy to meet criteria. You know what I mean? Like maybe not, maybe you won't meet 5, maybe whatever. But I think for me, like the key mm, flavor or the key thing that kind of gives it the flavor for me is that lack of empathy,
Okay.
right? Like you can be an asshole and not be a narcissist. You can
Yes.
have firm boundaries and
For
not give
me,
in to other people, but if that other person doesn't like that, then now you're a narcissist, right? So I can see where some of it's in like, I don't know, the interpretation of the behavior.
mhm.
But it's that lack of empathy, and I think what this DSM does not. Hmm, maybe you can speak to this a little bit more, or I don't know, kind of give your thoughts. But what it doesn't, like, you know, that narcissism flavor of when you meet a narcissist and you're like, that it is, this is it, right? The DSM doesn't, it's not tangible, right?
Right.
It's kind of like maybe you feel like you're going nuts because
Right.
they're exploiting you, and it's all self-serving and it doesn't make sense because they're in their own fantasy, their own narrative of what's going on, right? Like when you kind of piece all that together, that's that like narcissistic flavor when you meet someone who is actually a full-blown narcissist or very high on the trait scale, right? Because again, I think you can have traits of this and not necessarily meet all the criteria, but that doesn't mean that you're an easy person for others to relate to, or that you're not manipulative or self-serving or arrogant, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Exactly.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on that? Like, because how does the average person, and maybe it doesn't matter, right? Not like the average person can go around diagnosing, but maybe if that's where that pop culture part of it came from, is like these, they've
The
taken apart
nuances.
the diagnosis and singled out some of these like larger, more difficult traits to have in your families, friends, or partners.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I think a lot of things about that. I mean, I remember speaking of that, like that kind of that gut feeling, right? I remember when I was still in supervision as a clinician, um, my supervisor, who was amazing, she would always say, like, how does your body respond to this person? You know? And one of the things that I have always held true over the years, right? And so, gosh, 17 years of clinical practice is it's a dead ringer. My body is a dead ringer.
Mm,
When a client walks in my room and they have a personality disorder. Now, it doesn't always come out the first session. Sometimes it does, right? Sometimes I see it right off the bat, and sometimes it's really clear. And for me, what my body does is I feel this like kind of yucky feeling in my tummy. And I
mm.
remember when I was newer in practice under supervision, my supervisor said that is a sign of a personality disorders. When you feel that, you want to, as a new clinician, open up your DSM, start looking looking at these criteria. What could it be? Does my client meet any of these? Right? Because obviously your gut feeling doesn't really equal, enough to
An
warrant a
official
diagnosis. But
diagnosis.
right. But to dig in, what is it that I might be picking up on? Like my spidey senses are up here. That this is just something that is not really like within the range of normative behavior. And often these personality disorders are very, very harmful to other people,
Mm.
right? Not always. Sometimes they're not, but most often, if you look at all the personality disorders that are out there, it's very they can be very harmful to the people that these folks are in relationship with, right? Very difficult to interact with people who have personality disorders. Um, it can feel crazy making, right? And there is a pop culture term for that. They call it gaslighting, right?
Mhm.
Which is another kind of tricky thing. But essentially, that's when somebody with narcissistic personality disorder kind of twists things and spins things to where the other feels crazy. It's doing it again. I don't know why I can't figure it out.
You might, if it's your daughter, maybe she's exempt from your downtime. Like you can allow certain contacts to push through.
Okay, well, I guess I should allow her to push through. I'll next time I'll tell her I'm podcasting. Don't push through about Barbie movies. Um, yes. So where were we before the pushing?
The gaslighting.
Yes, gaslighting, right? So that's a hard thing for even clinicians to define, right, or to help clients tease out. But often this comes up where, let's say, if somebody, like if you and I we're in a relationship, right, and you do something that hurts my feelings, I can say, hey, you know what? When you said that thing, it really hurt my feelings the other day, and you'd be like, oh, dude, like I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that, right?
Hmm.
Because you're not a narcissist. But somebody who has narcissistic personality disorder might be like, well, you shouldn't have blah 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 blah, right? You made me do that because you did this first, and then I felt this way, and so you created this problem, or you're too sensitive, or that didn't happen. You're just making that up. That's not what I said at all, right? So then the other feels like, am I crazy? Like, what's happening here? That's what gaslighting is, in
Yeah.
essence.
Yeah. And that's that, I think when it comes to narcissism specifically, like there's that combined with a very self-serving narrative and way of being, right? It's like it's very image focused. It's
Mhm.
very superficial focused, right? It's how do I appear to the world? How does the world perceive me? How awesome am I? All these things. And it's interesting because I know arrogance is one of the criteria, right? But I often feel like these individuals that either meet the criteria or are full-blown narcissists are they're so easily threatened,
Yes,
which is why the gaslighting comes in, which is why the exploitation comes in, right? It's like anything to keep um distance and the facade.
that's right. That
Yeah.
there's this deep underlying insecurity that has to be covered by the superficiality of greatness, right? And that as long as others are reflecting that greatness back, it's all good.
Yeah.
But if one challenges that or doesn't bow down, that creates a threat, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
by saying, hey, you hurt my feelings when you did that thing, right? I have a positive sense of self esteem. I'm not going to be like, shit, man, I didn't mean to. Like, I was just, I put my foot in my mouth. I was busy. I was thinking it was a stupid thing to say. I didn't mean to do that, whatever. Because, like, I'm okay with the fact that I make mistakes all the time, right? Like, that doesn't
Yeah.
define my worth as a human. However, for somebody who truly has narcissistic personality disorder, this need to defend and protect that very vulnerable, that very fragile sense of self worth, right? So if it's challenged or not reflected, then the other becomes the enemy and then therefore can become a victim as well,
Mm-hmm.
because the other is then perceived as being not just any threat, but like Mortal Kombat, man.
Yeah.
It's interesting because the DSM, it's criteria 9. It's actually not arrogance, right? But it shows arrogant or haughty behaviors or attitudes,
Ah,
which is
like,
interesting. It's splitting hairs, right? But it is
yeah,
interesting.
yeah, but because it's not a real arrogance, right? Because yeah, because there's this feeling of lack of authenticity in a lot of ways, right? And it's interesting because I think about this is the other, I think, catching point is to have a personality disorder, you have to be this way in most or all situations. So it's not like you break up with your partner and they've turned into an ass and now they're a narcissist. They may be doing some of these things, right? They may be manipulating, they may not be showing empathy, they may be exploiting you, they may be doing all these things. But if that's the only time you've ever seen it, right? That is not a narcissistic person in general, right? It has to be consistent behavior with different people. So when I sit with this, I often also think about like, someone asked me this actually, like, do you see them a lot in therapy? And my answer is no, you do not, because guess who doesn't want to come to therapy? And if they do come to therapy, we usually will get fired pretty quickly by, by our clients who are narcissistic, right? Because it doesn't serve them. Now, does it mean they never come to therapy? No, I'm sure they do. They kind of creep in couples therapy, but they don't stay, because the second something is said to upset them or to challenge them, or if they are recognized as, right, a narcissist, then they kind of fire the therapist and move on.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's also lots of the personality disorders as well. But yes, right? Because I mean, a good therapist is going to get right to the heart, right, and be able to see those insecurities and see those vulnerabilities, because truly that's where the work is. That's where the growth is and the healing is. But for somebody with narcissistic personality disorder, they can't tolerate that being seen.
Yeah.
And the facade therapists don't like facades. That's like probably our least favorite things. Like,
Yeah.
okay, cut to the chase. Give me the
Yeah.
real deal.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So what are your thoughts on, well, and let's talk about this. What are your thoughts on whether it's someone with like narcissistic tendencies? Because that kind of relationship is toxic feeling for most people on the receiving end of that, right? So what are your thoughts on, if you have these people in your world, how do you manage that?
Stay far, far away. Just kidding.
Run. No, I mean, that may be part of it too. You know, I see a lot of clients who describe family members as such. They may be, they may not be. They may have traits and not be full-blown narcissists. I kind of feel like that's splitting hair, because if someone does some of these things to you, you have to sit and think, if I'm going to keep them in my life, what boundaries do I need to protect myself and to have a relationship with this person? And then for some of my clients, they've basically said, I can't be in the chaos with them, and I've had to separate, right? So I don't know if, to each their own. I think the journey is ever evolving for people. Some people start with like, I won't talk to you for 3 weeks, and then they get distance because it seems to flare back up, right? But yeah, I mean, maybe that is true, right? You create boundaries and limits. And I always tell people the most important thing, I tell this to everyone, any narcissist or not, like most of what's happening or most of what other people do to you within reason or what they project onto you is not about you. Right. So when a narcissist feels threatened and they start lashing out, that has nothing to do with you. That is them lashing out because it's their own stuff. Right. So I think for starters, like not taking ownership of their fragile ego state.
That's right. That's right. I mean, essentially, it's boundaries, right? Whether it is, I mean, I joke, but like a hard cutoff in a relationship, whether it's a friend you see, I mean, I've had, I had a friendship that it took me maybe a year to 2 years for this dynamic to unfold. And
Mm,
it was kind of one of those situations where it slowly unfolded, and it was irreparable. Like, it was beyond, it got really twisty, really weird expectations of almost like adoration and celebration and praise, and to the exclusion of other things, like other friendships, or even my family relationships, like my nuclear family, my work responsibilities. Which criteria is that? Number 4 requires excessive admiration, right? And but it took years for that to develop, right? Because I think that, again, as long as that facade can be maintained, the relationship goes smoothly. And the other side of a narcissist, when a narcissist is happy with you, i.e., you're doing the right things, right? You're
You make
fitting
them
in
feel good. You're feeding that ego
you're
strength.
making them feel good about.
Yeah.
That's right. They can be incredibly fun to be in a relationship with. A lot of times these people are very magnetic, very charismatic. Um, they think they have lots of interesting things to share.
Mm-hmm.
They
Yeah.
often present very well to the public. So there's somebody that you wouldn't mind being seen out and about with. Maybe they have some titles that they've accrued that make you feel like, oh, this is, I'm friends with so and so, the president of this thing, or the leader of that thing, or the town councilman, or the doctor, lawyer, dentist, whatever, right? So there's some prestige, maybe some access to things that might come with being friends with a narcissist, right? Because they've built their whole life around this facade, or actuality and times, right, of um presenting as being so valuable, right?
Yes. And they may be highly accomplished, successful people, right? I think the assumption that the DSM says, right, these accolades for, not necessarily for things, that does not mean they didn't deserve the accolades, right? And I think that's hard to tease out. There are some very charismatic narcissists because it serves a function, right? That's the manipulation part. They need connection. They seek connection. And then they blow it all up at the same time, which is, I think, where those that don't have that tendency get very confused, right?
Yeah.
Because they're seeking connection with you, like, and you feel like it's genuine because that's the intention. It's meant to feel genuine until you don't serve them, you make them mad, whatever, and then it all blows up and you don't know what happened, right? So I think it's, yes, it's not always so easy to identify because sometimes it's sneaky, especially if if you're on the periphery, if you're not, I think if you're like, if it's your partner, your mother, your father, I think it probably is a little bit more obvious than if it's, a new relationship or even a friendship, because there may be other people that see more of it or that are maybe more useful for that person.
That's right. Well, and I
Yeah.
think it's some of the dysfunction is a closeness of the, or a dysfunction is a, what's the word, function. That's why I got confused. The dysfunction is a function of the closeness in the relationship, right? Yeah. Like, if I'm a narcissist, I don't need for everybody to think I'm amazing, right? I just
Mm,
need the people that I interact with the most, right? The
yeah.
closest people to me. And it's going to be those closest people to me who are going to be able to see right through my bullshit, right? And so that's why these close relationships get so twisty and confusing and so toxic.
Mm,
So yeah, so back to your question, how do you stay in a relationship with someone? If you're going to be in a relationship with someone, I think the answer is boundaries, right? Whether they're firm boundaries or diffuse, it's up to you, probably, and the nature of the relationship, how close the relationship is, what you want in your life, how much you're willing to tolerate, what the risk versus benefit is of this person, right? If it's your mom or your dad, you might decide, or your child, right? You might decide, what I get from them is worth putting up with toxicity, right?
mm.
Or you learn how to come and go, kind of orbit. Like, okay, well, that was weird. I'm gonna check you later,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, Whereas a friendship, you're like, yeah, this is not anything I have to hold on to. Why on earth would I hold on to this if it's toxic? I'm just going to choose to find a different friend.
Yeah. Right. Like some people you may be stuck with for a little, for at least a little bit of time. Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
this really cool thing that I have learned from social media. It's called the gray rock method, and somebody made it up, but it's blown up, right, and become really popular. Have you heard of that?
Hmm.
It's kind of cool. It essentially alludes to like you just don't react.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like a narcissist wants a reaction from you. They want that heat. They want that fire. They want those crazy making toxic interactions.
Hmm.
And the gray rock method is just like you're just like stone. Like you're just not gonna do it. You're not going there. You're not gonna get hooked.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the choice that you have as an individual, right? Is I don't have to play into your narcissism, right? And I say that for those that are in a place in life where they have a choice. I imagine, right, children growing up with narcissistic parents, like you can't, and that's, probably a whole nother podcast, but that's, you don't see those traits, you don't understand them. It's just like, what the fuck is happening,
Mhm.
right? Like, something's weird, but
Right.
you're a kid and you have no, like real understanding of the reactions you may be getting. Yeah.
Well, and as a kid, right, and you can speak to this probably better than I can as a child therapist, but there's a developmental age, old brain cells here, right? Before which the child is incapable of seeing the caregiver as being flawed. Do you know what that age is?
Well, and there is an age at which you don't see the caregiver as separate from yourself, right? So before the age of like 2-ish, give or take, right? You're
Right, right.
not, you are like, you're one person from the kid's perspective, which think about that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, yeah, I mean, just on a really basic level, if the love for you is contingent on how you make your parent uh, think or feel or be viewed by the world, and you're a kid and you just do stuff that, it depends, your parent decides that made me look bad and now it's coming back to you, but there's no um genuine connection the way someone else would connect with their kiddo, right? So yeah, it's it's a very different perspective. And so I work with a lot of adults who describe that in their parents, right? But it's not until well into adulthood that they're like, I just recognized it,
Mm-hmm.
because it can be subtle.
Well, so right, so if a child, let's just throw out there, I don't know, let's just say 12. I don't think that's the right age, but let's just say that up until that point, right, if it is somewhere around there, if a child cannot developmentally see their caregiver as being flawed. So when there is that toxicity, when mommy or daddy's mad at you, it's because there's something wrong with you. You're a bad girl,
Mm,
right? And so then that sense of self incorporates this concept that I'm bad,
yeah.
right? I'm flawed. I'm broken. There's something wrong with me. I'm unlovable. I'm a bad
Mhm.
girl. I'm a bad boy.
Yeah.
And so then sometimes, right, in our 20s, we say, let me go to therapy because, like, right? And then you sit across from a therapist, and your therapist says, honey, like, I don't think it's you, man. I
Mm,
think you're just fine. I think you're wonderful. I think you're cool. I think this might have been your mom's stuff.
yeah.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
And then you start unpacking, and then you
Yeah.
change your story.
Yeah. And unfortunately for kids, there's no option, right? You survive it and then you go to therapy as a young adult.
Yeah, you can't be like, peace out, yo. I'm gonna move down the road.
Yeah, or as a later adult or whatever, whenever you come to realization. Yeah. And it's interesting because I don't know, like, do you have a statistic on the prevalence in men versus women?
Let me look at my DSM here. I have developmental and course. Okay, gender related diagnostic issues. Of those diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, 50 to 75% are male.
Yeah.
No, I mean, not, I mean, 50% is roughly half, 75% maybe more men than women.
Yeah.
I do think it'll be interesting to see because I think it'll be interesting to see how this evolves over time too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so I am not on the board of the DSM, so I don't know how they gather their info, but I would imagine that just because someone, again, if I said earlier, when asked how many of these people I see in therapy, and I say very few because they don't come to therapy, meaning who the hell's diagnosing them? So I know I started the podcast saying maybe we're over attributing these traits, but maybe we're not.
Mhm.
Maybe there
Well,
are a lot of people that are undiagnosed because they don't go to therapy until their family and friends have learned about this, you know, diagnosis and are going, oh my God, that's you. Right?
this
Like maybe it is more prevalent than we think.
yeah, yes. So this says prevalence estimates range from 0 to 6.2% in community samples, which is interesting. So I would assume, right, because most of this research is done, most research in psychology, for those people who don't know this, is done within university settings. So there are professors who teach and also do research as psychologists. And their classes, their students, if you will, right, do research with them. And so a professor who's tenured at a university has to be doing research along with teaching. So whatever their area of specialization is, the university says, "Hey, we want to do research on narcissism here. Let's offer this, Claudia Glassman a job because that's what she wants to research as a psychologist, right?" And so then they hire you and you start teaching and you get your classmates or your students who are also interested in researching narcissism, and so then you create these studies, right? So it sounds like these studies are done, it says community samples, so I don't know, maybe some sort of randomized assessment measure. I don't know
Mm.
where they get their community samples from,
Yeah, I
but
don't know.
psychologists are trained to try to be non-biased. Where like, yeah, so we see a skewed percentage of the population because we see people who are coming to therapy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we actually might see less narcissists.
Right. Well, right. Clinically, again, who I see are the family members of the narcissist, right? Because those are the ones who are coming
Yeah.
in for support and help. And again, do I know if they're officially diagnosed or if it's just, these traits? I don't know. But I do think, and I think like we did talk about this when we talked about anxiety is like the good and the bad with this pop culture therapy. Like part of me loves it because I think the more people that get educated on it, like the better for our profession. However, not all the information floating around out there is accurate. And it's ever evolving. I mean, you were talking about the DSM and its iterations before things get removed and added in and changed all the time. So 4 years from now, a diagnosis that you were diagnosed with today may not even be in existence or will have morphed into some other category, right? So it is an ever evolving manual that does seem to evolve with the population and society, right? It does have a societal bias, or a cultural bias, maybe.
How so?
So, well, it reflects where things are at the point in time. So hysteria is no longer in here. I don't know what DSM it was in, but I do know for a fact women were hospitalized for hysteria on the regular when you just annoyed your husband and he needed you out of the way. Hysteria. No, and like you were in a mental institution, right? Like that was a thing. So, you know, he could have been cheating on you and treating you terribly, but you were hysterical and off you go. That was a sign of the times.
Right.
Right.
Claudia, are women not to be seen and not heard?
I mean, at one point in time, this podcast really pissed some people off. Yeah, so I think, right, that is no longer in there. And there's been other diagnoses along the way that were, you know, pathologies at one point that are now just like, yeah, we took that out. It's just, it's not a thing anymore. So, right, I don't think that's necessarily gonna be the case for narcissism, but my point is that it is an evolving document, right? It's not set in stone. What we say today might change. The criteria could change. So that's interesting too. But I do think maybe just more people are aware of it. And I do think maybe a lot of people have these traits or the flavor or the tendencies, you know?
Well, and there's a pattern, right? And I don't know if this is spoken to in the DSM. The DSM does something really cool. They give the diagnostic criteria, right off the bat. And then for this, there's one, two, almost three full pages of narrative, right? That really talks about, okay, so what does this actually look like in real life? You know, and so, you know, if we were to dig deeper into that, we might find something about the patterns. But one of the really interesting things, if you think about it, right, from the standpoint of what I just shared, right? So if a child grows up with a narcissistic parent where there isn't that unconditional reflection of their self-worth, right? One of the things that we do as parents, good parents, is we're constantly reflecting our children's worth to them, right? You are fill in the blank, all the superlatives, right? Now, it doesn't mean they can behave anyway, but at the core, we see them as being smart and kind and creative and beautiful and gentle and pure and capable and fill in the blank, right? I'm forgetting lots of amazing superlatives, but we want for our kids to have that sense of self-esteem. Those messages are what their subconscious mind says, okay, let me absorb that. That's going to create my reality. Well, if a child of a narcissist gets the messages that they're not good, right? They're a bad girl, they're a bad boy, they're broken, they're shameful, they're an embarrassment, they're harmful humans. Then that's going to be their reality, right? And then they enter into adulthood. There's going to be this need to either to correct that, right? So guess what happens? These people are going to seek out others who tell them, no, you are good, no, you are worthy, right? And that can be a beautiful relationship dynamic, like with a really healthy, supportive spouse or partner, or a therapist, or a best friend, right? Or a sibling who went through something similar. Or it can also become toxic, right? Where it's feed me, feed me, feed me, admire me, admire me, admire me, which looks very similar to narcissism. Because that hole is there, that emptiness. They didn't get the unconditional positive regard from mom or dad. And so that hole, and it's like this bottomless pit of shower me with admiration, right? And here we repeat again.
Right. Yeah, I can see that too. Well, I could also see where, depending on the matching or mismatch of a parent and child, if you had a certain type of child with a certain temperament, I could see where maybe that child, because they make the parent look good consistently, get adoration, but like inflated maybe, or you know, like if you're serving your I don't want to say your purpose, but if you're making me look good, kiddo who's an overachiever and a perfectionist and all the things, I could see where you could even be a child of a narcissist and not get that other side because you didn't upset them yet. You just learn, maybe you learn that your value is in your achievements because that makes narcissistic parent happy. So you are an achiever and you are a performer, and there's some level of understanding that my worth is based on my output, right? Or my presentation. So that can look right now, you think about that in adulthood and it's like, wow, you're, hyper focused on outward things and accolades, and you're not narcissistic, you're wired to have learned that that was important. So you can definitely see where at least those traits can infiltrate the next generation.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So
Yikes.
what's the antidote?
Run. No.
How do we overcome these traits? How do we overcome? We talked about how to be in a relationship with someone, right? Which we talked about setting boundaries. Another thing about that, right? I think that it's important. We talked about the gray rock matter, which essentially is an internal boundaries. I'm not going there with you. I'm not going to let myself get engaged in this. But I think if you choose to be in a relationship with somebody who's narcissistic, one has to have an expectation that you're probably never going to be able to talk about hard things, right? You're probably never going to be able to say, hey, you know what, when you said that the other day, that really hurt my feelings,
Hmm. Yeah.
without it being this huge blow up.
So how would that relationship even work? Right? Realistically,
You can't ever bring it up. You have to just be
you
tolerant,
perform too. Yeah.
grateful, kind, sweet.
Yeah. Katie, that doesn't sound like a healthy relationship.
No.
Right. Well, and that's the point. You can't have a healthy relationship with someone who can't have a healthy relationship because of their own stuff, right? Like, um, I think we could talk for hours about this, and we could dive into like, well, what made someone narcissistic to begin with? And was it their childhood? Was it their growing up? Was it their, trauma? There's all kinds of things, right, that contribute to how we learn to navigate the world. Um, the way I conceptualize narcissism is just an attachment disorder walking around. It's no different than an avoidant personality disorder, right? Who has this like anxiety and fear of not being accepted, so they avoid, right? Narcissism is kind of in that spectrum of I want to connect, but you can't see any flaws in me. I can't tolerate that. I can't tolerate to be flawed or wrong or not to what living up to whatever this image is that I've decided I need to live up to. So like you can't connect deeply with someone like that because they don't I think they want connection, but it's so threatening that they can't access it, right? Um, so I don't know, yeah, if a healthy relationship is capable, unless someone can recognize this in themselves and want to do different. Maybe there's narcissists out there that do. I don't know.
Well, and I think that a lot of people would say that a deep relationship is predicated on the ability to connect and vulnerability, right?
Yeah. Well, and empathy is a huge component of it. So if you lack that for others, how do you ever connect?
Like when we chat, right? We chat about everything from like the bullshit that happened today, our kids, our health, whatever. And sometimes those life stirs up vulnerabilities. Either we're worried about something, we're wondering about something, or we're struggling with something. And after how many years have we been friends? 12? 2011 we met. February of 2011 we met.
That's like
Oh,
13. Yeah, well, yeah, a while. Yeah, it's been a minute.
can you imagine if we've been friends for 13 years and I never let you into any of my vulnerabilities, right? That would really govern the relationship. That would really say, like, okay, we can talk about the weather or decorations for our home or what color I'm going to do my hair, right?
Mm,
And some people are fine with that. Most therapists probably are not, but right, like a deeper relationship is going to involve those areas of life, like I'm worried about my kid, or man, my husband pissed me off or hurt my feelings, or my mom's struggling, or my health, or my finances, or whatever it is, right, that comes and goes. And those are vulnerabilities. And if you're trying to have a relationship with somebody with narcissistic personality disorder and they can't ever go to any vulnerability, but you're a normal
mm.
you want to go to vulnerability. And that's like, wow.
Yeah. 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 Well, and maybe those are the the people you keep on the outside, like the periphery, right? They just don't get too close. Because to your point, like they can be delightful and fun and, captivating, and doesn't mean you hold them close,
Mhm.
you know? Yeah.
And
Mm,
my guess would be that certain people would have a greater tolerance for those types of personalities than others, right?
mm,
Like maybe someone who is more of a laid back, easygoing, doesn't want to be the leader, doesn't want to be the center of attention, doesn't want to be focused on, doesn't want any praise themselves, doesn't want any acknowledgement themselves, right? Might be have an easier time being in relationship with somebody who is self-focused and doesn't have empathy for them or doesn't, want any attention taken away from them, right?
mm. Yeah.
Have an acquaintance who has some of these traits. I wouldn't say she necessarily has this disorder, but I w- she's not somebody that I would necessarily want to like make my best friend. But I will say when I'm around her, I can guarantee there's going to be no pressure on me to make conversation.
Mm.
She's going to do it all.
You're like, it's perfect. Yeah.
Sometimes it's in doses, right? In doses, right?
Right, because these people are a challenge for you when you try to have a close relationship, right? When it's your parent, your partner, your sibling, a good friend. If they're floating on the outside and you keep it, breezy and light,
Mhm,
they can do that. They can do that well,
mhm,
right? And the lack of empathy, they can fake that too, right? There's
mhm.
a difference between showing empathy and having empathy. And I think why some of these people are difficult to spot initially is because they're really good at peopling, but they're really good at peopling for their own benefit.
They have to. It's survival.
So yeah, like they also know if I can make her feel good, she can make me, right? Like there's an they have good social skills. And so you can feel like they're empathetic, but it's not a genuine feeling of empathy. They don't really understand where you're coming from. They don't really care to understand where you're coming from, but they can tell you they understand where you're coming from.
They've mastered the facial expressions and the
Yeah.
they're
Yeah.
ready.
Yeah, I mean, I do. I think the conversations I have with people around this are, and listen, boundaries or guardrails are important for every relationship. And I think, I tell people you can't change someone, right? Like they are who they are. I believe people can change if they want to, but if a person's totally happy living life like this, they are who they are in this moment, right? So how do you relate to that person? To be in relationship with that person, if that's what you choose, what does that look like? And for some people, it's, I will talk to them once a month. I will have 10-minute conversations, and it looks different for everyone. Some people say I will have nothing to do with them and I'm done. Um, so what that looks like varies a lot based on I guess your relationship and how that person presents in your life. But, I think it is about finding boundaries that work for you. And um it's not a simple answer. I think it depends on so many factors. And so find a good therapist and work on
Yeah.
figure out those boundaries, figure out what makes sense to you.
Okay, so let's talk before we end about what narcissism is not or what is not narcissism, right? So this isn't on a spectrum. This isn't something where, well, we all have narcissistic tendencies. No, no, right? Not according to the DSM, right? Not if we truly use these definitions. We
Mm.
don't all. So what is the range of normalcy in human behavior that is not narcissism?
Yeah, well, I think every human can be self-serving,
Sure.
right? We're protective of
Yeah.
ourselves, and it
We
can
should,
come
right?
across as self-serving.
Yes, yes. and here's what's interesting is I know at least in my own work in therapy, that was one of the things that I had to be taught was how to take care of myself.
Mm,
Really, like that's sometimes like a mark of personal growth is learning how to set those boundaries, how to say no, how to prioritize my needs, kind of put your oxygen mask on first, so to speak, right? Like I had a guy come in because his wife told him he was a narcissist. So he said, I'm here to find out if I'm a narcissist. I said, okay. Um, evidence number one that you're probably not, but we can explore it, right? Tell me more. What is it that she says that makes you narcissistic? Well, I go to the gym every morning. Okay. And then what happens? Right? Well, I find that when I've done that, I'm better able to handle the stressors of my day. I'm a better dad. I'm less reactive. He leads, I forget what kind of business he does, but he's in leadership, right? He has to deal with people coming at him. And he fills his cup first thing in the morning so that his cup is full.
mhm,
That does not a narcissist make.
correct.
Right.
Right. Even gaslighting, everyone can gaslight, does not mean you're a narcissist. It's just one of the many tools they have, but everyone can do it, right? You know, people that gaslight you that probably don't fall under this category. Not having empathy, you could also be a psychopath,
Yes.
you know? Um,
We call that
actually,
antisocial personality.
or right? Yeah. So, you know, we can go into that another day, but there's other criteria, it's criteria that can overlap into different diagnoses. When we did forever ago, we did the highly sensitive person episode.
That was a good
And one of
one.
the things that was interesting as I like dove into the world of highly sensitive people is that often they are identified as narcissists around the need to, I think it's the flavor of it looks like you don't care about others because your sensitivity overrides and your need to like manage your overwhelm. So it looks as though you don't care about others, but that's not necessarily the case, but you look controlling and potentially self-absorbed
Yeah.
because you're overwhelmed from emotions or sensory stuff. And it becomes like you're protecting yourself, you're trying to manage, but what that looks like on the outside can feel disconnected, self-absorbed,
Yeah.
right? Um, you can
Totally.
have insecure people that are, you know, that have a facade of arrogance, but
Mhm.
that's not necessarily narcissistic.
One of the things that's coming up for me is that those memes, like they have like t-shirts or whatever, like where it says like I'm not bossy, I'm the boss.
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Like if you truly are in a position of leadership, whether it is of your household or of a workplace or in a community of a church, right? Just because someone is truly in a position of oh, what's the word for that? Leadership?
Or status.
Status, that's the word, right? Status does not mean, right, that that person is a narcissist. No, they just have that status, or somebody who has gotten a lot of education at like different accolades or different credentialing, right, is kind of leading a field, is the thought leader, is the trend leader, right? That person's not necessarily a narcissist. Now they could also be a narcissist, but just
Yeah.
because they have accumulated status
Hmm.
doesn't mean they're narcissistic.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think even when you look at the DSM criteria, right, each criteria, and this is for most diagnoses in here, are like a specific behavior. You can
Yeah.
have that behavior or exhibit that behavior without meeting the criteria for something, right? I can have a persona of arrogance, but not be narcissistic. Maybe arrogant, maybe faking arrogance, right? But like you have to kind of tease it apart. But I do know when you run into one, you'll know. That's not helpful, people.
If you don't right up front, you will pretty soon.
Yeah, but I think it is important, right? No matter if it's a personality disorder or someone just with these traits, and you're like, I don't know if this fits for me, right? Maybe they're not a full-blown narcissist, but you're like, yeah, sometimes they're just not nice, or sometimes they're too self-serving. Doesn't mean they're a narcissist, but you absolutely get to choose, how do I want to interact with that person in my life? Do I set boundaries around it? Do I limit interactions? Do I cut them out? Like, we get to choose those things. So even if someone isn't a full-blown narcissist, maybe it doesn't matter, right? If it's someone who is invalidating you on the regular and you feel like crap to be around, I mean, it's probably a good sign that that person isn't for you,
Now you're going
regardless of their diagnosis,
right.
right? But I do think it is a way that we, in one word, try to describe what someone's like. Like, even I said it, like, that flavor, right? That's what the word is when it's like, oh my God, so-and-so is such a narcissist. What I'm trying to tell you is the flavor, right? I'm using that one like word to summarize all these things. So I don't know. I mean, maybe there are more walking around than we know about. And because it's become, people are more educated on things, maybe they're diagnosing people in their lives and maybe they're not wrong. I don't know, but
Well, and I think again, one of the things that, because this is science based, right? One of the things science can't tell us is the how and the why, right? That's not scientific. That's more philosophical, right? We
mhm.
can't quantify and measure how and why, right? So again, like you said, there are trends. So when this was published, maybe it was 0 to 6.2%. Maybe it is higher now. Maybe it's not higher now. And we're just broadening our definition, even if that diverges from the technical, like the biblical definition, right, in the DSM.
Mm.
Um, but I'm always curious about generational trends, right? And what's going on in our country and what's going on in the world and how one generation's experience influences the other,
Mm.
right?
Yeah.
Like I caught myself this morning. This is so unrelated, but so interesting. I was cleaning up after my daughter's breakfast and she left like one piece of banana on her plate. It was a perfectly fine piece of banana. Do you think I threw that piece of banana in the trash?
You ate it.
I didn't, but I saved it to be eaten later. Like that's how weird I was. I'm doing this intermittent fasting thing, so it wasn't time for me to eat yet, but I set that little perfect banana aside. So when it was time for me to be eating, that banana was ready to be eaten because it was a little perfect piece of banana. It didn't deserve to go in the trash. And then I thought to myself, you know what was interesting? I was very, very close to my grandmothers, and they both went through the Depression.
Mm.
And one was more thrifty than the other, and she would never throw anything away. I mean, reduce, reuse. This woman was like the poster child for recycling. You know, food got stored. She didn't buy Ziploc bags, right? Back then, newspapers were delivered to every driveway, and she would save the newspaper bags. I'm sure she washed them, and she would store food in that. She had one
Mm.
glass jar that she bought orange juice in at some point in the history. Only one jar. And she made tea and would keep tea in this jar in her refrigerator my entire child, like until the day she died. She died at 96. When she passed, she had the same clothes that she wore to church in the 50s, the same jewelry she wore, the same shoes she wore, right? The same linens, these antique, right? At that time, towels and sheets and plates and cups and the furniture in her home. I remember one time when I was a teenager, my cousin and I got in a pillow fight. And the only time I ever remember her scolding us, because it was the only time she ever had bought anything new that I could ever remember. She bought new pillows for her couch, and she was like, no, you may not fight with those pillows because I just bought new ones, right? But this is just a depression mama. And so she had to make things work. So I think that's where I honestly get my trend of by saving my banana piece, right? It's like this mentality of like, why throw it away if it could be useful, right? But so if you think about, I'm just so curious about this, like it's like an epigenetics, right? How
Mm.
are we influenced by these generations and the patterns of generations? And like we talked about, what's a child raised by a narcissist? How do they manifest as an adult
Mm.
filling those holes, right? Is that narcissism? Is it not? I don't know. There's this term out there called wounded narcissist, which is
Mm.
kind of speaks to that, like this emptiness on the inside because mommy or daddy didn't ever say how wonderful we were, right? Um, and how do we correct that? Therapy, right?
Yeah.
But these trends, right? So is it more popular now? Is it more prevalent now? I don't know, right? If we were to trace this back to um, what happened last generation, what happened the generation before that, that could be creating some of these tendencies, right? Like, let's
Yeah.
say, when is war? When were wars happening? Somebody said to me the other day, they said, we didn't get the luxury, I forget who it was who said this, of thinking about fill in the blank because we were at war,
Yeah.
right? It was okay, so there was no entitlement. There was no, like,
Mm.
extras. It was survival.
Yeah. Right. And you imagine, culturally, like where someone is born and raised. I do wonder often with this is obviously an American, the DSM is an American diagnostic manual. I actually want to totally dive into what do they look like in other countries. But that being said,
Mhm.
what's pathologized here may not be pathologized elsewhere. I don't know, right? Or what we don't pathologize, someone else might, depending on culture, beliefs, and society in different places around the world. So, yeah, I think, historical events probably impact this, where you're from, traits that are valued. Like if you're from a place where empathy is not valued, you know what? You're doing really well if you have a lack of empathy and just do you, right? That might be celebrated in another,
Right.
right? So yeah, it is an interesting, and then so does that, are they breeding, are they
Mhm.
breeding this disposition, I don't know. But yeah, there's a lot of factors. I think we should actually dive into mental health criteria in other countries. That'd be cool.
So
No one wants to hear that podcast. Everyone's like, please to God, no.
please don't. But listen, this is interesting because I was just looking. So I got my DSM open here. So narcissistic personality disorder on the facing page. Right before this one, they talked about histrionic personality disorder, and there is a whole paragraph devoted to culture related diagnostic issues. Now, there is not that for narcissistic personality disorder. We have gender related, but we do not have culture related diagnostic issues for narcissistic personality disorder. So I don't know why that is, but
Mm,
go figure.
I don't know. Hmm.
We
We'll
have
have
it
to
again.
solve those problems another day. Yeah. So again, we've solved nothing, but I think the key is right boundaries. I think it's getting your own support around how to navigate challenging relationships, right? And um, if something is not is toxic to you, you have to figure out what to do with that, right?
Well, and that's where I think, again, shameless plug for our profession. A good professional is going to be able to help you tease out, is this your stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because not always, if a relationship is feeling bad, does it mean that it's a bad relationship or it's a toxic person or a toxic relationship. It might just be it's stirring up some of our own vulnerability, our own issues, that we might need just a sounding board, whether it's a therapist or our spouse or a best friend, right? To say, like, hey man, like, this is coming up for me. Do you think this is like a thing, or just my own shit? How should I handle this?
Yeah.
Or just have somebody say, like, do you think this person could be fill in the blank, right? Somebody who's maybe toxic for you, somebody that might not be in your highest good to have a close relationship with.
Yeah.
And it can get so muddy, and that's one of the things with in these relationships, particularly with people with personality disorders. It gets so confusing. It feels so
Mm.
confusing. What's real and what's not real? I didn't say that, but they're saying that I said that, or I didn't do that, but they're insinuating that I did that, or I don't feel like I'm bad, but they're acting like I'm bad, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Because you get so confused by things that don't make sense to you, right? Yeah. You get to a point where you don't know, is it me or is it them? And oftentimes we're like, well, it must be me because they're telling me it's me. I'm nuts. They're not. They seem to be very convincing that I'm the problem. Right now, you're the problem, or you think you're the problem. Yeah. Which maybe you are for them. Right.
yeah, they're
Yeah.
talking to their therapist about you.
Right. Yeah. Well, and yes, it's, Again, they probably aren't because they don't go to therapy much.
That's right.
And because when the question comes in, is it a you issue or a them issue, right? And any good therapist, and I do know from the work I do that there are some narcissists and therapists and have found, ears to listen to and feel very validated. And yes, we validate, but I also challenge my clients, right? So the second you get to the point of like, is it them or is it you? Like, what's your stuff that's in play here? That's when they're shut down,
That's right.
Yeah. Well, that was fun.
Oh, we
Good luck
did
to
it.
everyone out there who is involved with the narcissist at the moment.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
again, you may have said this in a while, but we are on lots of platforms now. And so if anybody has any questions about any other aspect of this topic that they might want to have addressed, or I don't know, like rule outs, like could this be part of it? Is this not part of it? Feel free to comment, leave us questions. We are on Instagram at from our perspective to
Podcast.
their what is it?
Dude, Katie runs our Instagram. Please hold. I think it's From Our Perspective podcast.
Okay.
Hold on. I'm going to confirm. Oh my gosh. This is, oh, hold, please.
I'll look it up too. We'll raise From Our Perspective. Oh, From Our Perspective podcast. You're right. My search worked well.
We should at least know things. Yeah, you can tell we do a lot of social media, guys.
Be busy. Okay, From Our Perspective podcast. So you can leave comments there. You can also send us messages there if you want something to be private, and we will answer your messages very anonymously and privately and sensitively. And you can find us each on our clinical websites, claudiaglassman.com and mightyoakparenting.com. And I am RobinKatieTruax.com. We're also on Spotify. What is it called? It's not iTunes, is it? What's the podcast thing? Apple Podcast?
Yeah. We're on all podcast platforms, I believe. I actually, this is run by us, so it is not a smooth, well-oiled machine sometimes. We're therapists, not techies. We don't know this stuff. I'm impressed that I can even upload this at all.
I'm impressed that I can post on Instagram sometimes.
Right? So, if you're into low tech people, we're your people.
That's us.
All right. Well, that's all for today. Thanks, everybody.
Probably another week. We'll
Bye.
talk to you soon.